Jake Harper's boots echoed in the empty corridor as he made his way deeper into the station's forgotten levels. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cold air. He'd been working on this salvage job for 6 months now, and he thought he'd seen every corner of the old Zelthorian outpost. Turns out he was wrong. The human salvage company had bought this place cheap after the Zelthorian Empire collapsed. Most of the valuable stuff was already gone, but Jake's job was to catalog what remained in the lower sectors. Nobody else wanted to do it. The pay wasn't great and the work was boring. But Jake didn't mind. He liked the quiet and he liked working with his hands. This particular door had been sealed tight. Not just locked but welded shut from the outside. Someone really didn't want anyone getting in. Or maybe they didn't want something getting out. Jake spent 2 full hours cutting through the reinforced metal with his plasma torch. His arms ached and his eyes stung from the bright light of the cutting tool. When the last section finally gave way, the door fell inward with a heavy crash that made him jump. Jake grabbed his headlamp and stepped through the opening. The air inside was different. Stale. Ancient. Like nobody had breathed it in decades. His light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the chamber. Then he saw it and his heart nearly stopped. A creature lay sprawled across the floor, chained down like some kind of prisoner. But this wasn't just any creature. It was massive, at least 40 feet long from its nose to the tip of its tail. The body looked like something out of Earth's old legends. A dragon. Wings folded against its sides, 4 powerful legs stretched out, scales covering every inch of its body. But something was terribly wrong. The scales weren't shiny or healthy looking. They were dull and cracked, like dirt that had been baked under a desert sun for too long. Parts of the creature's skin looked paper-thin, as if it might tear at any moment. Energy restraints wrapped around its neck, each leg and both wings. They glowed with a sick purple light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Jake stood frozen in the doorway. He'd seen a lot of weird alien stuff in his time working salvage, but nothing like this. The creature's eyes opened slowly. They were huge, probably the size of dinner plates. But it was what Jake saw in those eyes that hit him hardest. Intelligence. Deep, ancient intelligence. And something else. Hopelessness. Complete and utter despair. Jake's hands shook as he pulled out his scanner. He had to know what he was looking at. The device beeped and hummed as it collected data. When the results came back, Jake felt sick to his stomach. The creature had been here for 97 years. Nearly a century. The scanner detected life signs, but they were wrong somehow. The chains weren't just holding the creature in place. They were doing something far worse. The energy fields were keeping it alive, forcing its body to keep functioning. But at the same time they were blocking everything else. Every basic biological function. Every need. Jake's mind raced. 97 years without food. Without water. Without sleep. The chains kept it conscious, kept it alive, but gave it nothing. It was torture. Pure, calculated torture. He looked up at the walls and spotted symbols carved into the stone. His translator device flickered to life, converting the Zelthorian text into English. The heretic. Let none show mercy. Jake's stomach turned. This wasn't a prisoner. This was a statement. A warning. Some kind of punishment that was meant to last forever. He looked back at the creature. Those ancient eyes were still watching him. Not with anger or fear. Just emptiness. Like it had given up hoping for anything to change a long time ago. Jake thought about walking away. This wasn't his problem. He was just a mechanic doing a job. He could seal the door back up, mark it as empty in his report, and nobody would ever know. That would be the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But as he stood there in that dark chamber, looking into those hopeless eyes, Jake felt something shift inside him. He thought about what it would be like. 97 years of suffering. No food. No water. No relief. Just endless, burning agony. Nobody deserved that. It didn't matter what species they were or what they'd done. This was wrong. Jake took a deep breath and stepped closer to the creature. He was just one guy with some tools and a salvage permit. He had no authority here. No backup. No plan. But he was human, and humans had a bad habit of helping people even when it made no sense to do so. He looked into those ancient eyes and spoke quietly. I'm going to help you. It was a promise that would change everything. Jake couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those ancient, hopeless eyes staring back at him. He lay in his bunk on the salvage ship, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that creature chained in the darkness below. At dawn, he gave up on sleep and went straight to the station's database. If the Zelthorians had kept records about their prisoner, Jake needed to find them. He spent hours digging through old files, most of them corrupted or deleted. The Zelthorians had tried to erase everything when they abandoned the station. But they'd missed some things. Hidden deep in a backup server, Jake found what he was looking for. And he wished he hadn't. The creature's name was Vorthan. He belonged to a species called the Drachner. According to the files, the Drachner had been a proud civilization. They valued honor, art, and philosophy. They'd been peaceful, more interested in building than fighting. Then the Zelthorian Empire came. Jake read through the invasion reports. The Zelthorians had swept across the Drachner homeworld like a plague. They'd enslaved the population, stripped the planet of resources, and crushed any resistance. Most of the Drachner had submitted. They had no choice. But Vorthan had been different. He'd been some kind of leader, a voice his people listened to. And he'd spoken out against the occupation. He'd called the Zelthorians tyrants. He'd urged his people to resist, to hold on to their dignity even in chains. The Zelthorians couldn't just kill him. That would make him a martyr. So they did something worse. Jake found the torture specifications, and his hands started shaking as he read them. Some sick genius had designed those energy chains specifically for Vorthan. The chains did something Jake's mind could barely comprehend. They kept every cell in Vorthan's body alive and functioning. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. His brain stayed sharp and aware. But the chains blocked everything else. Every natural biological process that would give comfort or relief was suppressed. Vorthan couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't sleep, couldn't even pass out from the pain. The worst part was the thirst. The files explained it in cold, clinical detail. The chains created a constant sensation of severe dehydration, burning throat, cracked lips, a desperate, all-consuming need for water. But the chains also prevented dehydration from actually killing him. They forced his body to keep going despite the agony. For 97 years, Vorthan had experienced that burning thirst every single second of every single day. And according to the torture specifications, it was meant to continue for 300 more years. Jake ran to the bathroom and threw up. When he could breathe again, he washed his face and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His hands were still shaking. He thought about reporting this to his supervisor. Let someone else deal with it. Someone with more authority, more resources. But Jake knew how these things worked. They'd form a committee, hold meetings, debate ethics and legal jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Vorthan would remain in that chamber, suffering. Jake grabbed his portable terminal and headed back down to the lower levels. The chamber felt even colder this time. Vorthan lay in the exact same position as before. Those massive eyes tracked Jake as he entered, but there was no hope in them. Just a dull acknowledgement that something had entered his eternal prison. Jake sat down on the floor just outside the range of the chains. His throat felt tight. What do you even say to someone who's been tortured for a century? He decided to start simple. My name's Jake, he said. His voice echoed in the empty chamber. I'm human. I know you can understand me. The translator's working. Vorthan didn't respond. Didn't even blink. After 97 years of complete silence, why would he bother? But Jake kept talking anyway. He told Vorthan about Earth. About humanity's recent arrival in the wider galaxy. He pulled up images on his terminal and held it where Vorthan could see. Pictures of water. A mountain stream, clear and cold. Rain falling on a forest. Ocean waves crashing on a beach. A simple glass of water with condensation dripping down the sides. The Zelthorian Empire fell, Jake said. They're gone. Humanity bought this station 6 months ago. We're salvaging what's useful and junking the rest. Still no response from Vorthan. But Jake thought maybe those ancient eyes focused a bit more intently on the screen. Jake kept talking for 2 hours. He showed more pictures. Told stories about his home, about the salvage work, about anything he could think of. His voice grew hoarse, but he didn't stop. Then, finally, Vorthan moved. It was just a small movement. One massive talon lifted slightly off the stone floor. The claw extended, making a gesture that was slow and deliberate. Jake's breath caught. He didn't need a translator for this. The meaning was universal, crossing every language and species barrier. Vorthan was asking for a drink. That single gesture held so much weight. It was the first time in nearly a century that Vorthan had communicated with another living being. The first time he'd asked for anything. The first tiny spark of hope breaking through all those years of despair. Jake looked at that gesture and felt tears running down his face. He wiped them away quickly. I'm going to get you water, Jake said, his voice shaking. I promise. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Vorthan's talon slowly lowered back to the floor. Those ancient eyes closed for a moment, then opened again. Still hopeless. Still expecting nothing. But Jake had made a promise. And he meant to keep it. Jake walked out of that chamber with a mission burning in his chest. He'd made a promise to Vorthen and he wasn't about to break it. But as he rode the elevator back up to the main levels, reality started to sink in. He had no idea how to actually deliver on that promise. The next 3 days became a blur of work and obsession. Jake barely slept. He brought his tools and equipment down to the lower levels and set up a makeshift workstation just outside Vorthen's chamber. He needed to understand how those chains worked if he had any hope of beating them. His supervisor started getting suspicious on the second day. Beth Reynolds cornered him in the corridor outside the storage bay. "Jake, what are you doing down in Sector 9? She asked, arms crossed. "You've been spending a lot of time there." Jake's mind raced. He couldn't tell her the truth. Beth was good people, but she was also by the book. If she knew about Vorthen, she'd have to report it to corporate. Then lawyers would get involved and politicians, and the whole thing would turn into a bureaucratic nightmare. Vorthen would stay chained while people argued about jurisdiction and ethical protocols. "Just cataloging some ceremonial equipment," Jake said, keeping his voice casual. "Lots of weird religious stuff down there. Taking time to document it properly." Beth gave him a skeptical look but eventually nodded. "Fine. Just don't take too long. We're behind schedule as it is." Jake escaped before she could ask more questions. Back in the chamber, Jake spread out his scanner readings and technical diagrams on the floor. The more he learned about the chain system, the more he hated the people who designed it. Every detail was calculated for maximum suffering. The chains monitored everything within a 10-foot radius. If they detected any water molecules approaching Vorthen's mouth, the suppression field would intensify and neutralize them. Even humidity in the air got absorbed and dispersed. The system was designed to be absolutely foolproof. Jake spent hours running simulations on his portable computer. Every approach he tried, the system had a counter for. Direct water delivery? Blocked. Atmospheric moisture? Neutralized. Even injecting water through Vorthen's scales would trigger an alarm. On the third day, Jake was ready to punch a wall in frustration. He sat on the cold floor, his head in his hands, staring at his equipment. How do you beat a system designed by experts who'd thought of everything? Then it hit him. He was thinking like an engineer trying to override the system. But he was a mechanic. Mechanics didn't override things. They found the cracks, the gaps, the little imperfections that always existed in any machine. Jake pulled up the power flow diagrams again. The suppression field ran constantly, drawing energy from the station's main reactor. But like any system, it had to verify that everything was working correctly. There. Jake's finger traced a line on his screen. Every 90 seconds, the system ran a self-check. It pinged all the components, verified they were active, and logged the results. For that brief moment, the system was checking itself instead of monitoring Vorthen. Jake's heart started racing. If he could fake the verification signal, make the system think everything was running normally, he could drop the suppression field during that check. The window would be tiny. 90 seconds at most, probably less. But it might be enough. He worked through the night, building what he needed. He raided his ship's emergency supplies and pulled out the pressure pump from the backup water system. He fabricated a delivery tube from spare parts, something that could blast water at high pressure. Then he carefully threaded the line into Vorthen's chamber, positioning the nozzle near the dragon's head. The technical work was the easy part. The hard part was the risk. If Jake got this wrong, alarms would scream through the entire station. Security systems might activate. Worse, the chains might interpret his interference as an escape attempt and increase the torture protocols. He could make things worse for Vorthen. But doing nothing was also a choice, and Jake couldn't live with that. When everything was ready, Jake sat down in front of Vorthen again. The dragon's eyes opened, those ancient pupils focusing on the strange equipment Jake had brought. "I think I found a way," Jake said. His voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. "I can drop the suppression field for 90 seconds. Maybe less. The chains will come back online after that, but during that window you'll be able to drink. I've got a high-pressure water line set up. It should work." Vorthen stared at him. For the first time since they'd met, something flickered in those ancient eyes. Not hope exactly. Something more dangerous. Fear. Then Vorthen spoke. The voice was rough, broken, like rocks grinding together. A voice that hadn't been used in nearly a century. "Why?" The single word took visible effort. "Why risk yourself for me?" Jake felt his throat tighten. Here was this magnificent creature, tortured for almost 100 years, and he was asking why someone would help him. What kind of universe had Vorthan lived in where kindness needed explanation? Because nobody deserves what they did to you, Jake said simply. He met those ancient eyes without flinching. I don't care what you did or who you were. This is wrong. And I'm going to make it right. Vorthan's eyes closed slowly, then opened again. A single tear rolled down his scaled face. I am ready, Vorthan whispered. Jake's hand moved to the control panel he'd rigged up. His finger hovered over the activation button. Okay then, Jake said. Let's get you that drink. Jake's finger rested on the activation button. His hand was shaking so badly he had to grip his wrist with his other hand to steady it. This was it. No going back now. Here we go, he whispered. He pressed the button. The change was immediate. The chamber's constant hum shifted to a different pitch, like a machine suddenly straining against itself. The purple glow from the energy chains flickered and dimmed. Jake's homemade bypass system was working, feeding false signals to the verification loop. The suppression field dropped. What happened next would haunt Jake's dreams for the rest of his life, but not in a bad way. Vorthan's entire body convulsed violently. Every muscle seized at once. His wings snapped outward, straining against the physical chains that still held them. His claws gouged deep scratches into the stone floor. A sound tore from his throat, something between a roar and a sob. For 97 years, every biological function in Vorthan's body had been suppressed. Every nerve that screamed for water had been muted but never silenced. Now suddenly all of it came rushing back at once. A century of thirst crashed over him like a tidal wave. Jake didn't hesitate. His hand slammed down on the pressure valve. The pump kicked in with a mechanical whine, and water blasted through the delivery tube. Cold, pure, beautiful water sprayed directly into Vorthan's open mouth. The sound the dragon made was primal, something that came from the deepest part of his being. It was desperate and raw and full of need that no words could express. Vorthan drank in massive, gulping swallows. His throat worked frantically, his entire body trembling. Water splashed everywhere. It ran down his cracked scales, pooling on the floor around him. Some of it missed his mouth entirely, but Vorthan twisted his head, chasing every drop like his life depended on it. Because in a way it did. Jake's eyes were locked on the timer display on his control panel. 80 seconds remaining. That's it, Jake said, his voice choked with emotion. Drink. Take as much as you can. Vorthan's scales, which had been dull and cracked like old leather, began to glisten where the water touched them. Tears streamed from his ancient eyes, mixing with the water that poured over his face. Jake couldn't tell if the dragon was crying from relief or pain or joy. Probably all three at once. 70 seconds. The water reservoir on Jake's pump was draining fast. He'd brought every drop he could carry, pulling from his ship's emergency supplies. He cranked the pressure higher, forcing more water through the line. 60 seconds. Vorthan's drinking became even more frantic. Some part of him must have known the time was limited. He gulped down water so fast that Jake worried he might choke, but the dragon's body seemed to know exactly what it needed. 50 seconds. Jake's heart was pounding. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold chamber. He kept one hand on the pressure valve and the other on his bypass system, making constant tiny adjustments to keep everything running smoothly. 40 seconds. Come on, buddy, Jake muttered. Get as much as you can. Don't stop. 30 seconds. The water reservoir was nearly empty now. Jake pushed the pump as hard as it would go, extracting every last drop. The stream started to sputter slightly, but Vorthan kept drinking, his mouth locked onto the tube like he'd never let go. 20 seconds. Jake could see the warning light starting to flash on his control panel. The verification loop was completing. The system was about to realize something was wrong. 15 seconds. Almost there, Jake said. His voice was barely a whisper now. Just a few more seconds. 10 seconds. The pump sputtered one last time and went dry. The water flow cut off. Vorthan's eyes went wide, desperate for just one more drop, but there was nothing left. 5 seconds. Jake's hand hovered over the emergency cutoff, ready to shut down his bypass system before the alarms could trigger. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The suppression field snapped back into place with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The purple glow flared bright for a moment, then settled back into its usual sickly pulse. Vorthan slumped in his chains, his massive body going limp. Water still dripped from his jaws, running in rivulets down his neck and chest. His scales glistened with moisture for the first time in nearly a century, catching the light from Jake's headlamp and reflecting it back like scattered jewels. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jake sat frozen at his control panel, his heart hammering in his chest. Vorthan lay still, his eyes closed, his breathing heavy and labored. Then Vorthan's eyes opened. And everything about them was different. The hopelessness was gone. The dead, empty despair that had filled those ancient pupils had been replaced by something fierce and burning. Life. Real actual life. Vorthan's gaze locked onto Jake with an intensity that made the mechanic want to step back. But he held his ground. "I will remember this," Vorthan whispered. His voice was still rough and broken, but there was strength in it now. Real strength. Forever. Jake felt tears running down his own face. He wiped them away with a shaking hand and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Good," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. He had to clear his throat and try again. "Good. Because I'm coming back tomorrow with more water. And I'm going to figure out how to get you out of here. That's a promise." Vorthan's eyes closed again, but this time it looked like peace rather than resignation. A single word escaped his lips, so quiet Jake almost missed it. "Brother." Jake sat down hard on the cold floor, suddenly exhausted. His whole body felt like rubber. But he was smiling through his tears. They'd done it. It was just 90 seconds. Just a few gallons of water. But it was a start. And for the first time in 97 years, Vorthan had hope. Jake worked carefully over the next 6 days, spending every moment he could in that hidden chamber. Each morning before his shift, each lunch break, each quiet evening after the other workers had gone to sleep, he returned to Vorthan. The energy restraints were more complicated than anything he had ever worked with before. They weren't just physical chains. They were technology designed specifically to cause pain, to drain strength, to keep a powerful creature helpless. The first day, Jake managed to weaken just one restraint by 15%. His fingers ached from the delicate work. His eyes burned from staring at the tiny energy patterns flowing through the alien metal. But when he brought water to Vorthan during those precious 90 seconds, the dragon's gratitude made every ache worthwhile. "You came back," Vorthan whispered, his voice still weak but growing steadier. "I was afraid it had been a dream." "I'm real," Jake promised. "And I'm getting you out of here." The second day brought progress and danger. Jake discovered he could reroute some of the energy flows, making the chains weaker without triggering immediate alarms. But the work was exhausting. He had to memorize complex patterns, trace power sources through walls, and calculate precise timing. One mistake would alert the station's security systems. One miscalculation would send voltage surging through Vorthan's body. During his water delivery that day, Vorthan noticed Jake's exhausted expression. "You're pushing yourself too hard," the dragon said with concern. "You need rest." "I'll rest when you're free," Jake replied stubbornly. Vorthan's eyes showed something Jake had never seen before. The ancient creature was actually worried about him. Here was a being who had suffered for nearly a century, and he was concerned about a human who had lost a few hours of sleep. They talked more each day during those brief windows of time. Vorthan shared memories of his homeworld before the Zelthorians came. He described cities built into mountainsides, where Draknar architects created structures that worked with nature instead of dominating it. He spoke of festivals where young dragons learned to fly, guided by patient elders. He remembered a civilization built on honor, where strength was measured by how you protected the weak, not how you conquered them. "We were not perfect," Vorthan admitted during the third day. "We had conflicts, disagreements, even wars among our clans. But we had principles. We had codes. When the Zelthorians invaded, many of us expected mercy when we surrendered. We thought all advanced species understood such basic concepts." Jake felt anger burning in his chest. "What happened?" "They showed us that advancement and wisdom are not the same thing," Vorthan said quietly. "They had incredible technology, vast knowledge, ships that could cross galaxies. But they had no compassion. They saw other species as resources to exploit or obstacles to eliminate. Those who resisted died quickly. Those who surrendered, like me, were kept alive for study and entertainment." The fourth day brought a breakthrough. Jake finally understood the pattern of the entire restraint system. It was like a puzzle where every piece affected every other piece. He couldn't just break one chain. He had to weaken all of them simultaneously, then disable them in a specific sequence. Otherwise, the system would simply redistribute the energy and activate backup restraints. "That's brilliant and horrible," Jake muttered to himself as he worked. Whoever designed this really wanted to make sure their prisoner stayed caught. But understanding the system meant he could finally beat it. He began working longer hours, sometimes going 20 hours straight with only brief breaks. His supervisor noticed his exhaustion but assumed he was just enthusiastically learning the station. She had no idea he was planning the most important jailbreak in galactic history. During the 5th day, Jake told Vorthan about Earth. He described oceans and mountains, cities and forests. He talked about humanity's long history, the wars and peace, the mistakes and triumphs. He explained how humans had always dreamed of reaching the stars, of finding other intelligent life, of joining a greater community among the cosmos. We imagined first contact would be this beautiful moment, Jake said. Peaceful aliens arriving with wisdom and friendship. Instead, we found a galaxy full of empires and exploitation. Species treating each other like property. Powerful civilizations enslaving weaker ones. It's been disappointing, honestly. Vorthan listened carefully. Your disappointment shows your species has something precious. You expected better because you believe better is possible. Many species lose that belief after enough time in this harsh galaxy. They accept cruelty as normal. They participate in systems of suffering because everyone else does. Your people are still young enough to be shocked by injustice. That innocence is valuable. Doesn't feel valuable, Jake said. Feels naive. Naivety and hope are different things, Vorthan replied. Naivety means not understanding the darkness. Hope means seeing the darkness and choosing to light a candle anyway. What you're doing here, Jake, is hope made real. Those words kept Jake going through the exhausting 5th day and into the 6th. His hands shook from fatigue as he made the final adjustments. His vision blurred from lack of sleep. But he kept working because Vorthan's suffering had to end. Because sometimes one person really could make a difference. Because hope required action, not just wishes. On the morning of the 6th day, Jake made his final calculations. Everything was ready. The chains were weakened to their breaking point. The energy flows were redirected. The backup systems were disabled. All he needed was one final push, one last sequence entered correctly, and Vorthan would be free. His hands trembled as he input the codes. Not from fear of getting caught anymore. From fear of failure. What if he had missed something? What if the system had safeguards he hadn't discovered? What if his best effort wasn't good enough? The console beeped softly. Green lights appeared across the display. And then, with a sound like breaking glass, the energy restraints shattered. The chains fell away from Vorthan's body, clattering against the stone floor. The glowing bands of energy that had burned him for 97 years flickered and died. The cruel technology that had kept him prisoner simply stopped working. For a moment, Vorthan didn't move. He seemed frozen, unable to believe what had happened. Then, slowly he lifted one massive claw. He moved it freely through empty air. No chain stopped him. No energy burned him. He was actually, truly, finally free. Vorthan rose to his full height for the first time in nearly a century. His body unfolded, muscles stretching, joints moving without restraint. His wings spread wide, filling the entire chamber with their span. He stood 20 feet tall, a magnificent creature of scales and power, looking every bit the noble dragon he had once been. Jake stood perfectly still, suddenly very aware of how small he was. How fragile. This creature could end his life with one casual swipe. Those claws could slice through metal. Those teeth could crush stone. That ancient predator stood free and powerful, and Jake was alone with him in a hidden chamber where no one would hear screams. But Jake didn't run. He had trusted Vorthan this far. He would trust him now. Vorthan lowered his massive head slowly until his eyes were level with Jake's. The dragon's gaze held an emotion so powerful it made Jake's chest tighten. Then Vorthan did something Jake hadn't expected. The ancient dragon bowed deeply, lowering his head until it nearly touched the floor. In Drakner culture, Vorthan said, his voice strong now, no longer weak with pain, this gesture creates a sacred bond. It cannot be broken by time or distance. It transcends species and circumstance. Jake Harper, you are my brother now. That is not a debt. That is not an obligation. That is a truth written into the fabric of who I am. Jake felt tears running down his face. He hadn't cried in years, but this moment broke something open inside him. You don't owe me anything, he said, his voice shaking. You're free. That's all I wanted. That's enough. Vorthan raised his head and looked directly into Jake's eyes. No, my brother. It is not enough. Freedom given freely is the rarest gift in this galaxy. Most species trade freedom for profit. They negotiate, they bargain, they demand payment. You asked for nothing. Expected nothing. You freed me simply because suffering is wrong and you could end it. The galaxy must hear this story. They must learn that humanity chose mercy when they could have chosen profit. They must know that when you encountered injustice, you fought against it. They left the chamber together that day, walking side by side through the abandoned station corridors. Jake led the way to the inhabited sections. Vorthen following behind, his footsteps shaking the floor. The reaction when they emerged was spectacular. Jake's supervisor, a tough woman who had seen plenty of strange things in her career, actually stumbled backward and nearly fainted. Other workers shouted in alarm. Someone triggered a security alert. Within minutes, armed guards surrounded them. But Vorthen remained calm, patient, gentle. He explained his situation clearly. He vouched for Jake completely. He demonstrated his peaceful intentions by sitting down and making himself as non-threatening as a 40-foot dragon possibly could. Jake stood beside him, refusing to back down despite the weapons pointed at them. He was tortured here for 97 years, Jake said firmly. By the previous owners. We're supposed to be better than that. If we send him back to that chamber, we're no different than the Zelthorians who put him there. The guards didn't know what to do. The supervisor didn't know what to do. This situation wasn't covered in any manual. Eventually, they contacted higher authorities who contacted their authorities, until finally someone with actual power made an actual decision. Vorthen could leave. He was free. Word traveled fast through communication networks that connected the galaxy. The Drachner, scattered across dozens of worlds, heard the impossible news. One of their elders, believed lost forever, had been freed. And the species that freed him, these new humans everyone had been ignoring, had done so expecting nothing in return. Drachner representatives reached out immediately. They wanted to meet these humans. They wanted to understand this species that valued mercy over profit. They wanted to thank Jake personally for what he had done. The diplomatic meetings that followed were complex and lengthy. Governments negotiated terms. Lawyers drafted agreements. Politicians made speeches. But underneath all that formal process, something simpler had already happened. Two species had connected through an act of pure kindness. 6 months after Jake freed Vorthen from his chains, the official alliance ceremony took place. Representatives from Earth and from the surviving Drachner clans gathered in a massive hall. Speeches were made. Documents were signed. Everyone celebrated this new partnership, this alliance between humans and dragons. Jake stood beside Vorthen throughout the ceremony, feeling out of place among all the important officials and diplomats. He was just a maintenance mechanic. He didn't belong at events like this. Vorthen seemed to sense his discomfort. The great dragon leaned down and spoke quietly, his voice meant only for Jake. They celebrate politics and treaties today, Vorthen said. They think this alliance began in government offices and negotiation rooms. But you and I know the truth. This began with something far simpler. Jake smiled despite his nervousness. A drink of water, he said softly. A drink of water, Vorthen agreed. Given freely to one who suffered. Humanity entered our story not with weapons or threats or demands for payment. You entered with kindness. With compassion. With the simple recognition that suffering is wrong regardless of who suffers. The galaxy will never forget that, Jake. Neither will the Drachner. Neither will I. Jake looked around the celebration, at the humans and Drachner beginning to know each other, at the beginning of what might become a beautiful friendship between species. All of this because he couldn't walk past suffering without trying to help. I just did what felt right, Jake said quietly. Exactly, Vorthen replied. And that tells me everything important about your species. When you didn't know what else to do, you defaulted to kindness. Many species default to cruelty or indifference. Humanity defaults to compassion. That quality will either save you or destroy you in this harsh galaxy. But it will definitely make you memorable. Jake thought about that. About Earth and humanity's place among the stars. About all the ways this could have gone wrong. About how one small act of mercy had somehow changed everything. Some bonds, forged in the darkest places and built on the simplest kindness, burn brighter than any star. They transcend politics and treaties. They connect souls across impossible divides. They remind the galaxy that advancement without compassion is worthless, but compassion itself is priceless. Jake had entered that chamber 6 days ago just hoping to help one suffering creature. He emerged having changed the course of human history. Not through violence or conquest or clever negotiation, but through the simple recognition that a thirsty prisoner deserved water, regardless of what species he belonged to or what anyone else might think. That was the story the galaxy would remember. Not the politicians or the ceremonies, but the moment when a human mechanic chose mercy, and a dragon learned that kindness still existed in a cruel universe.